I've always loved hiking. The solitude, the crisp air, the way the forest seems to breathe around you, everything about it brings me peace. At least, it used to. Last fall, I planned a 3-day solo hiking trip in the northern Appalachians. I picked a route that led to a place called Blackwater Hollow, a valley deep in the woods, shrouded in mist and mystery. Few hikers ventured there, mostly due to old local legends, stories about people vanishing without a trace, strange noises in the woods, and other superstitions. But I didn't believe in any of that. I thought it was just folklore meant to scare kids. The first day was uneventful. The trail was well marked and the weather was perfect. As I descended into the valley, the trees grew denser, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, blocking out most of the sunlight. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the wind through the leaves felt oddly muted, like the forest was holding its breath. By the time I reached the hollow, dusk was settling in. I found a small clearing near a stream to set up camp. As I pitched my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I chalked it up to nerves. This was the most remote I'd ever been. That night, I sat by the fire, eating a simple meal and listening to the stream trickle nearby. The silence was overwhelming. No crickets, no owls, not even the distant howl of a coyote. Just the faint crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then I heard it. A distant sound, like someone humming. It was soft, almost melodic, but unsettling. It seemed to come from deeper in the woods, beyond the stream. I froze, straining my ears. The humming stopped abruptly, leaving the silence even heavier than before. I told myself it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the unease. I doused the fire and retreated to my tent, zipping it shut and lying awake for hours, listening for any sound. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but my dreams were restless, dark shapes moving through the trees, whispers I couldn't understand, and the feeling of being watched. The next morning, the forest felt different. The air was thicker, almost oppressive, and the sunlight struggled to pierce through the dense canopy. I decided to explore the hollow before heading back to the main trail. As I hiked, I noticed strange things. The trees grew twisted and gnarled, their trunks scarred with deep grooves, almost like claw marks. I found a patch of ground littered with animal bones, bleached white and arranged in a strange circular pattern. Then there were the carvings. Every few hundred feet, I'd come across a tree with symbols etched into its bark, crude, jagged shapes that didn't look like any language I knew. Some resembled eyes, others spirals or jagged lines. They all seemed to point deeper into the hollow. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity, or maybe something else, pushed me forward. Around midday, I stumbled upon an old cabin. It was nestled in a dense thicket, its roof sagging and walls covered in moss and ivy. The door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Against my better judgment, I approached. The air around the cabin felt colder, and the forest was unnaturally silent. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The interior was sparse, an old wooden table, a single chair, and a fireplace filled with ash. But what caught my attention was the wall opposite the door. It was covered in symbols, identical to the ones I'd seen carved into the trees. They were etched into the wood, deep and angry, as if someone had gouged them with a knife. On the table lay an open notebook, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was erratic, almost illegible, but I managed to piece together fragments. They watch from the trees, always watching. The hollow calls, it never lets go. Don't follow the whispers. A chill ran down my spine. As I stood there, I heard it again, the humming. This time it was closer, coming from just outside the cabin. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I crept to the window and peeked out. At first, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then, movement. A figure emerged from the woods, its silhouette tall and unnaturally thin. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, and its limbs moved with a jerky, almost puppet-like motion. It stopped about 20 feet from the cabin, its head slowly turning toward the window. Though I couldn't see its face, I felt its gaze, cold and piercing, like it was staring directly into my soul. The humming grew louder, more discordant, as if coming from all around me. I didn't think. I grabbed my pack and bolted out the door, sprinting back the way I'd come. The forest seemed alive, the trees pressing in on me, their branches clawing at my clothes and skin. The symbols on the trees blurred past me as the humming followed, growing louder and more frantic. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Eventually, I stumbled onto the main trail and didn't stop until I reached my car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it standing at the tree line, watching. I've tried to forget about Blackwater Hollow, but the nightmares won't stop. I still hear the humming in the dead of night, and sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I feel that gaze again, cold and unrelenting. The hollow hasn't let me go, not really. It all started with a dare. Spend one night alone in Pine Haven Forest, my friend Derek had said, grinning like he'd already won. No phone, no flashlight, just you and the woods, unless you're chicken. I wasn't chicken, or so I told myself. Pine Haven was notorious in our small town, a sprawling, dense woodland, avoided even by seasoned hikers. There were stories, of course, about hikers who went missing, strange lights at night, and a strange figure locals called the Watcher. But it was all just talk. At least, that's what I believed. Armed with nothing but a sleeping bag, a canteen, and a lighter, I set out late that afternoon. The forest swallowed me whole as soon as I stepped off the main road. The towering pines stretched endlessly in every direction, their thick needles blocking out most of the sunlight. By the time I found a small clearing to camp, the shadows were long, and the air was cool and damp. I set up near a fallen log and started a fire with some dry kindling I found nearby. The flames danced weakly in the growing darkness, casting flickering shadows that made the trees seem alive. At first, it was peaceful. The quiet hum of nature surrounded me, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. But as night fell, the sounds began to change. It started subtly. The wind seemed to carry whispers, faint and indecipherable. I thought it was just the breeze brushing through the pines, but then it grew louder. Leave. The word was so faint, I thought I'd imagined it. But then I heard it again, unmistakable and chilling. Leave now. My heart pounded in my chest. I stood up, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. The trees were still, and the forest seemed empty. I tried to laugh it off, muttering something about my imagination running wild. That's when I noticed the silence. The owl had stopped hooting. The rustling leaves had stilled. Even the wind seemed to have disappeared, leaving the forest unnaturally quiet. And then I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the firelight, stood a figure. It was tall, its silhouette almost blending with the trees. Its head was tilted at an odd angle, and its arms hung unnaturally long at its sides. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away. "Leave now," the voice whispered again, louder this time, as if it came from everywhere at once. The figure took a step forward, and I finally snapped out of my trance. Grabbing my sleeping bag and canteen, I doused the fire with dirt and ran. The forest seemed different now. The trees were denser, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I couldn't find the trail I'd come in on, and every direction looked the same. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. "Turn back. You don't belong here. Run." I stumbled over roots and rocks, my breath ragged and my legs burning. The whispers seemed to be inside my head, circling around me like a sinister chant. Then I heard something new. Footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and far too close. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the figure again. It moved with an unnatural grace, its long limbs almost gliding through the trees. I ran harder, panic driving me deeper into the forest. Suddenly, I broke into another clearing. In the center stood an old, crumbling stone well. It looked ancient, its moss-covered stones cracked and uneven. Something compelled me to approach it. I don't know why. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was something else entirely. The whispers grew louder as I neared the well, shifting from warnings to something darker. "Stay. Join us. Down below." Peering into the well, I saw nothing but darkness. It seemed bottomless, an abyss that swallowed the faint light of the moon. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. I turned slowly, and there it was, the figure, standing just a few feet away. For the first time, I saw its face, or rather, the lack of one. Its head was featureless, smooth and pale like stretched skin. It raised one long arm, pointing at the well. "Go," it whispered, its voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. I backed away, shaking my head. My foot slipped on the edge of the well, sending loose stones tumbling into the darkness. The figure stepped closer, its movements deliberate and slow, as if savoring my fear. I grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at the figure, but it passed through as if it wasn't there. And then it lunged, its arms stretched impossibly long, clawing at me as I stumbled backward. I felt a cold, unnatural grip around my wrist and screamed, thrashing wildly. My foot caught on the edge of the well again, and I fell. I don't remember hitting the bottom. When I woke, I was lying in the clearing where I'd set up camp, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. My belongings were scattered, and my sleeping bag was torn to shreds. My wrist was bruised, the skin icy to the touch. I didn't wait to figure out what had happened. I grabbed what I could and ran, somehow finding my way back to the road. I told Derek and my other friends what happened, but they just laughed it off, saying I'd let the local legends get to me. But I know what I saw. Sometimes, at night, I hear the whispers again, faint and distant, calling me back to the forest. And my wrist, it's never warmed up. It feels like something is still holding on.